My name's Jessica Lander, and I am a teacher at Lowell High School in Lowell, Massachusetts. I teach history and civics to recent immigrants and refugee students from more than 24 countries. In March of 2020, I wasn't actually in the classroom. I had taken a year to step outside of my classroom. I had a research fellowship, and I was researching and beginning to write a book on immigrant education. And so up until March, I was actually traveling around the country visiting incredible, innovative schools supporting newcomers. And I was also speaking with my former immigrant origin students to learn about their stories of migration to the United States and their experience of our schools. And then March comes and schools across the country shut down. And I had set up to go visit a whole bunch more schools, and suddenly they were closed and you couldn't travel. And in those first couple of months, I decided to dive into the historical research for my book. And so researching the stories at the heart of landmark Supreme Court cases and federal laws that transformed immigrant education in this country. And then in the fall of 2020, I did return to the classroom. Of course, it was the virtual classroom because we were totally remote at the time. And so I met my students with them zooming in from their kitchens and their living rooms, and I zoomed in from my basement. And thinking about that year, last year, it was for my students, just as it was for students all across the country and all across the world, just an incredibly difficult year. COVID-19 heightened huge disparities in access and really shone a spotlight on inequalities in our communities and our systems. And it was a really hard year for my students, for all of us. Many of my students struggled with internet access. Many were essential workers, taking jobs with long hours to support their families. Many also had younger siblings at home that they then became caregivers for, or elder family members. I think everyone struggled with loneliness. A number of my students struggled with depression, and some of my students got sick with COVID, as did their families. And so in thinking back at that year, I think one of the things I was most worried about going into the year was supporting my students' social-emotional. Because yes, I'm a teacher of history and civics, but I think some of the most important teaching I do happens in the conversations in the in-between spaces when a kid comes and wants to talk about a fight they had with a friend and how to make it better, or getting advice on how to talk to a parent. And I was worried that we didn't have those spaces anymore, and would students feel comfortable coming to talk or reaching out if they needed support? And so one of the things that I thought about, a small way to bridge that gap, was to buy mint plants. And so at the beginning of the year, I bought 150 little baby mint plants. Mint, of course, is like calming. It has a soothing smell. It's also a plant that's recognized and grown all across the world. Of course, my students come from all across the world. And then after school, I would drive around our city and meet with students one-on-one, socially distant, masked, and each of them would plant a mint plant, and they'd name it, and they'd take it home with them. And so in that way, even though we were all separate, we were doing something together, and we checked in on our mint plants throughout the year. And even despite all those difficulties, my students did incredible things in school. My immigrant and refugee students in the fall published a cookbook of family recipes that they had carried with them from across the world and stories of their migrations here. And then we shared that cookbook in our community. And then in the spring, they collaborated together to work on a semester-long action civics project where they were tackling real community issues that they cared about. My seminar students wrote stories of self for the National We Are America project, which is a project that my former students and I co-created in 2019. And so thinking about this past year teaching in a pandemic, I think it really shined a spotlight on the huge inequalities in our system and those huge inequalities that we really need to fix right now. And it also shined just an incredible spotlight on the strength and the determination and the creativity of our students.